Before you swing that hammer, you might want to read page 3. The auctioneer looked up. So did every speculator in that courthouse parking lot. It was April 1986, and the morning was cold enough that you could see your breath. About 30 people had shown up, farmers, lawyers, land investors from Des Moines and Kansas City, who'd been circling Harlan County like birds over a carcass. They'd done their homework. 160 acres of prime bottomland, appraised at $148,000. County was selling it for back taxes, estimated clearing bid somewhere around $80,000. These men hadn't driven 2 hours to lose money. They'd driven 2 hours to double it. The man who spoke wasn't loud about it. Dale Cutter was 41 years old, wore the same work coat he'd worn for a decade, and was holding a manila folder like it was a paid mortgage. He walked up to the county's appointed auctioneer, a man named Breck from the assessor's office, and handed him 2 stapled pages. It's a right of first refusal clause, signed in 1979, recorded with the county. I'd suggest the county attorney review it before this proceeds. Breck took the pages, read them. His face changed, and that was the moment the auction stopped being a sure thing. To understand why that piece of paper mattered, you have to go back 7 years. Back to a kitchen table in late November 1979, when a woman named Vera Stanton was trying to figure out how to keep her farm. Vera's husband Raymond had died in March of that year. Heart attack in the equipment shed. He was 53. They'd farmed that 160 acres together for 22 years. Corn and soybeans mostly, with a small hog operation they'd wound down in the mid-70s when prices collapsed. When Raymond died, Vera was left with the land, the house, and about $4,200 in a checking account. The farm carried a remaining mortgage of $31,000 with First State Bank. Payments of $610 a month. She also owed $3,800 in property taxes that Raymond had deferred when cash was tight. Vera was 50 years old. She didn't drive a tractor. She hadn't placed a seed order in her life. She had no idea what the crop share market was paying that year or who to trust. Dale Cutter was her neighbor. His farm abutted hers to the north. 240 acres his father had left him, paid off, free and clear. Dale was 34 in 1979 and had been farming since he was 19. He knew Raymond. They'd shared equipment when it made sense and traded labor during harvest for years. When Raymond died, Dale kept an eye on things. He mowed the ditch, checked that the drainage tiles weren't backing up. It wasn't charity. It was what you did. By October 1979, Vera's situation was clarifying into something dangerous. The bank wasn't going to extend her grace period past January. The tax arrearage was accruing penalties. She had enough to make 2 more mortgage payments and nothing after that. She needed income from the land, and she needed it fast. But she couldn't farm it herself, and she couldn't afford to hire a full operation. Dale came over on a Tuesday evening. He brought a yellow legal pad. They sat at Vera's kitchen table for 2 hours and worked through the numbers. Here's what they agreed to. Dale would farm all 160 acres on a crop share basis. He would provide all equipment, seed, fertilizer, fuel, and labor. In exchange, Vera would receive 35% of the gross crop revenue off the land each year. Dale would receive 65%. That split was slightly more favorable to Dale than standard. Usually it ran closer to 40-60, but Vera understood the risk he was absorbing. If the crop failed, Dale lost his input costs. Vera lost nothing but her share. She was the landlord. He was the operator. They also put something else in the agreement. It was Dale's suggestion, and Vera's lawyer, a man named Harold Ennis out of Grinnell, helped them word it properly, a right of first refusal clause. In plain language, it meant this: if Vera ever sold the farm, or if the farm was ever subject to a forced sale, Dale had the right to match any offer before the property went to an outside buyer. He didn't have to outbid anyone, he just had to meet the price. And he had 30 days to do it once formally notified. It wasn't a promise to buy. It wasn't an option contract. It was a contractual right, the right to step in front of the line if the land was ever on the block. Harold Ennis filed it with the county recorder's office in December 1979. It cost $14 to record. Dale signed it. Vera signed it. 2 witnesses. Notarized, he kept that contract in a fireproof box in his office. For 5 years, the arrangement worked. Dale planted corn in rotation with soybeans across the 160 acres. First year, 1980, corn came in at 112 bushels per acre. Vera's 35% share off 160 acres at $3. 10 per bushel put $19,500 in her account. She paid her mortgage current. She paid off the tax arrearage. She had money left over for the first time since Raymond died. The arrangement ran quietly from there. Dale handled every decision: soil tests, seed variety, application rates. He knew that ground, had watched it from his fence line for 15 years. He knew which 40 acres flooded in a wet spring and needed to go to beans. He knew the south field drained fast and could handle early planting. Vera received a check each November. Dale filed the paperwork. Harold Ennis reviewed the arrangement every 2 years to make sure it was still properly documented. But this is 1985, and the farm crisis has arrived in Harlan County the way a slow freeze arrives, gradually, then all at once. Corn that had been $3.10 per bushel in 1980 was now sitting at $2.25. Land that had been appraised at $2,000 per acre in 1981 was being reassessed at $925 per acre as the tax base collapsed. Banks were calling notes. Farmers who'd borrowed against inflated land values in the late 70s were underwater. Equipment dealers were going quiet. The co-op in town laid off 4 people. Dale's own operation was under pressure. He was farming 400 acres total, his 240 and Vera's 160, and his input costs hadn't dropped as fast as crop prices. In 1985, his net off the entire operation was $31,000. That was before family living expenses. He was not in crisis, but he was not comfortable. Vera's situation was different. Her 35% share off the 160 acres came out to $16,800 in 1985, down from a peak of $22,000 in 1982. Her mortgage was paid off. She'd cleared it in 1983, ahead of schedule, from the good years. But the property tax on 160 acres had been recalculated by the county assessor as part of a broader reappraisal. Her bill went from $2,100 per year to $3,400. She could pay it. But she was also 76 years old that year, and she had 2 medical bills from a hip replacement that her insurance had only partially covered. She owed $4,100 to the hospital in Ames. In February 1986, Vera paid her hospital bill. She was going to get to her property tax in March, but March came and her oil furnace cracked its heat exchanger. She paid $1,800 to fix it. She intended to pay the property tax in April. She never got the chance. The county had sent the delinquency notice to an old post office box, one she'd stopped using 2 years ago. She didn't see it until a neighbor mentioned, matter-of-factly at the feed store in early March, that her place was on the April auction list. The property tax owed was $3,400. Plus penalties and interest, it had grown to $4,180. That was it. That was the entire amount that put 160 acres of productive farmland on the auction block. When Dale found out, he drove to the county assessor's office the same afternoon. He asked whether Vera could pay the lien and stop the process. The clerk checked the calendar. The property had already been certified for sale. The county attorney's position was that once certified, the auction would proceed unless the full amount, now $4,280, including filing fees, was paid in a lump sum within 10 days. Vera had $1,100 in her account. Dale paid the $4,180 that afternoon. He wrote a personal check. He thought that would end it. It didn't. The county attorney reviewed the situation and determined that because the sale had already been publicly announced and speculators had been formally notified, the county's legal position was to proceed unless the property owner made the payment herself, directly before the certification date, which had passed. Dale's payment on Vera's behalf was being treated as a loan, not a redemption. The county attorney was not being vindictive. He was following the statute as he understood it. But the result was that the auction was still scheduled. Dale drove home and sat at his kitchen table. His wife Carol put a pot of coffee on and didn't say anything for a few minutes. He opened his fireproof box. He pulled out the manila folder. He read every page of the crop share agreement and the right of first refusal clause. He read it twice. Then he called Harold Ennis. Harold was 71 and semi-retired, but he remembered the agreement. He drove out the next morning. They sat at the same kitchen table where Dale and Vera had worked out the original deal 6 years earlier. Harold read the clause. He read the county statute. He made 2 phone calls. Then he came back and sat down. "The clause is valid," Harold said. "It's recorded. It predates any lien. The county has to formally notify you before any sale proceeds, and you have 30 days from notification to exercise your right. They didn't notify you, which means the auction is premature. Can we stop it? We can pause it, long enough for you to decide if you're going to exercise the right. And if I do," Harold looked at him, "then you need to match the winning bid. Whatever that turns out to be. You've got the right to buy it at that price, but you've got to have the money." This is where it gets hard. Dale went back to his kitchen table that night with a legal pad and a calculator. The land was appraised at $148,000. A distress auction with motivated buyers from outside the county. Men who knew the land was worth more than the tax lien and were looking to flip it to a larger operation within 18 months. Those men might bid anywhere from $70,000 to $95,000. Dale didn't know the number yet. He wouldn't know until auction day, but he had to be ready to match it. He had $18,000 in his operating account. His equipment was owned outright, a 1978 John Deere 4440, a combine, a full set of planting and tillage equipment. He had no mortgage on his own 240 acres. His land was appraised at $221,000 at current depressed values. It had been worth $480,000 4 years ago. He called his banker, a man named Phil Garner at Harlan County State Bank. Phil had been lending to Dale for 15 years without a single late payment. Phil understood the situation immediately. He ran the numbers on his end. He called back the next morning. "I can lend you $75,000 against your 240 acres, Phil said. "But Dale, at current land values, that puts you at a 34% loan-to-value ratio on your own ground. That's not reckless. But if land keeps dropping and you're carrying that note on top of your operating line, you're in thin air." Dale wrote that number down. $75,000 plus his $18,000 in cash, that gave him $93,000 to work with if he had to. Would it be enough? He didn't know. If the speculators drove it to $95,000 or $100,000, he couldn't match it. If they bid $80,000 and he matched at $80,000, he'd be servicing a $62,000 debt on land that was generating $16,000 a year in crop share income. Debt service on a $62,000 30-year note at 11%, because that was the rate in 1986, was $590 a month, $7,080 a year. That left him $8,900 net off the land annually, enough to service the debt. Not enough for comfort, not enough for a single bad year. He wrote the numbers down 4 times, each time they came out the same. It was possible, but it was not safe. Carol sat across from him and read the numbers upside down. She didn't ask him if he was going to do it. She already knew the answer. What she asked was, "What happens to Vera if you don't?" He didn't answer that out loud. He didn't need to. The auction was a Tuesday morning. Harold Ennis was there. Phil Garner from the bank was there with a cashier's check for $75,000 ready to be released. Dale had his own $18,000 available by wire. He wore the same coat he always wore. He got there early and stood near the back of the crowd. The county attorney reviewed Harold's documentation for 45 minutes. 2 of the Des Moines investors, men in newer coats than Dale's, stood near their cars and watched. One of them made a phone call. One of them read the clause himself when the county attorney passed it over. Neither of them looked happy. But neither of them left. The county attorney confirmed the clause was valid. The auction was paused. A formal notification was issued to Dale on the spot. His 30-day clock started. The county attorney explained that the auction would be rescheduled within 45 days, and that at that auction, Dale would have the right to match any final bid, with payment due within 72 hours. Dale nodded. He thanked Harold. He drove home. He had 30-some days to find out if he could actually do it. The bank commitment was real, but it was contingent on appraisal and final underwriting. Phil had been honest. The approval was likely, but not guaranteed. If land values kept dropping and the bank's internal appraisal came in lower than expected, the available loan amount could shrink. Dale spent the next 3 weeks watching the mail and trying not to think about it. He planted his own fields. He serviced Vera's ground. He kept moving. The bank's appraisal came back at $228,000 for his 240 acres. The loan was approved at $74,500. Combined with his cash, he had $92,500 available. He wrote that number on a piece of paper and taped it above his desk. The rescheduled auction was on a Wednesday. 7 bidders registered. The 2 men from Des Moines were back. There were 2 others from Kansas City, a local farmer from 2 counties over, a land investment LLC out of Chicago. The county attorney read the right of first refusal terms aloud before bidding started. Everyone understood that if they won, they could lose to Dale Cutter at the same price. That mattered. 2 of the outside bidders withdrew before bidding started. They hadn't driven this far to buy land, they'd immediately have yanked away from them at their own price. The farm crisis had created a market for distressed land, but it ran on speed and opacity, getting in fast before anyone local could organize a response. A valid recorded contract with matching rights destroyed that model entirely. 4 bidders remained. Bidding opened at $50,000. It moved in $5,000 increments. It stalled at $71,000. The Chicago LLC pushed it to $74,000. The Des Moines man bid $76,000. Stalled there for almost 2 minutes. The auctioneer called it twice. Going once, going twice. Sold $76,000. Dale matched it. He matched it standing right there in the courthouse parking lot. He signed the paperwork the same day. Phil Garner's wire transferred $58,000 from the banknote. Dale's $18,000 in cash covered the rest. He paid $76,000 for 160 acres that had been appraised at $148,000 and was generating $16,000 a year in crop share income. He signed the deed. He kept his word. It was not a triumphant moment. There was no crowd. There was no applause. He drove back to Vera's house and sat at her kitchen table and told her what had happened, that she could stay, that the farm was still in the family, technically his now, but the arrangement would continue unchanged. Her 35%, her house, her right to live there as long as she wanted. Vera didn't say much. She made coffee. She looked out the window at the field that was just starting to show green. She said, "Raymond would have liked you, Dale." He drove home and sat at his own kitchen table and looked at the number he'd written above his desk. $92,500 available. He'd used $76,000. He had $16,500 in reserve. His debt service was now $7,080 per year on the land. His operating line was untouched. It was survivable. It was not comfortable. But it was his. He paid off the note on Vera's land in 9 years. By 1995, crop prices had partially recovered. The land he'd bought for $76,000 was appraised again at $141,000. He never sold it. He still farms it. It still runs on a crop share model, though the operator is his son now, and the rates have been adjusted twice over the years as input costs changed. Vera Stanton died in 1998. She left a short will. The farm, Dale's farm, legally since 1986. She couldn't leave, but she left him her husband's pocket watch and a letter that said simply that she'd never once worried about the land after they signed that agreement. Not once. Here's what this story is really about. It's not about a legal trick. It's not about a clever loophole. The right of first refusal clause wasn't magic. It was a piece of paper that 2 people agreed to in good faith, properly documented, properly filed, and honored for 7 years before it ever mattered. Most people who sign agreements like that never have to use them. The whole point is that you might not. But you might. The county wasn't a villain. Tax liens exist because municipalities need revenue, and delinquent property taxes are a real problem. The process worked exactly as it was designed to work, except that nobody in the assessor's office had checked the county recorder's files before scheduling the auction. That's not corruption. That's a bureaucratic gap that a $14 filing fee closed in 1979. The speculators weren't villains either. They were doing what distress markets invite people to do, identifying undervalued assets and acquiring them cheaply. The reason that felt wrong in 1986 wasn't because they were breaking rules. It was because the rules were the only thing standing between 160 acres of working farmland and a land flip that would have taken it out of production and out of the community for a decade. The contract stopped that. Not luck, not family drama, not a midnight phone call from a sympathetic judge. A signed, recorded 7-year-old contract with a $14 filing fee and a clause that said, before you sell this land to anyone else, you give this man the right to match the price. Dale risked his own ground to exercise that right. He didn't have to. Nobody would have blamed him for standing aside. The math was thin. It was years of careful, debt-free farming pledged against a note at 11% in a market that was still falling. He could have watched those Des Moines men drive away with the deed and told himself it wasn't his problem. He didn't. Because it was his problem. It had been his problem since he signed that agreement in 1979. He signed it, he kept his word, he read the contract. That's the whole story, foresight and follow-through, a piece of paper filed in a courthouse nobody thought to check. And a man who understood that some agreements mean more than the paper they're written on, and that you'd better have the paper too. Would you have risked your own farm to save hers? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories about land, law, and the people who held things together during the farm crisis, subscribe. There are a lot more of them. Every one of them comes down to the same thing. What you agree to before the pressure arrives determines everything about what happens when it does. He signed it. He kept his word. He read the contract. That's how you hold a farm.